Is this crazy? We stand on the verge of the 4 greatest years in the history of Make America Great Again. How can you be against it?
It's week 2 of Trump's second term in the White House, and the president and his new administration are continuing to change the federal government at record pace. That's almost too quick to keep up with. Plus, Trump's pause on all federal grants has thrown Washington and government programs across the country into chaos. Welcome to Sidebar from the Washington Post. I'm Rhonda Colvin, here with James Hohmann and our White House reporter, Cat Zakrzewski. Welcome, Cat.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Today we'll get a peek inside the Trump administration, these first 7 days, what it's been like from Cat. And we'll also sort of break down some of the major headlines that have been happening. The Inspector General's firing, the pause on federal funds. But first, Cat, I want to hear from you as a White House reporter. What has the last week been like? Can you describe what it looks like from the inside?
It's been absolutely a whirlwind for the past week. I think, it's hard for me to believe that we are just a week removed from the inauguration when you look at how much this president has already done to transform American society and really change the way our government operates. And he's been doing this in very jam-packed days. I'm sure we'll talk very soon about the trip that he just got back from last night, but it really has been a nonstop week. And I think for a lot of us in DC, we're, just wondering how to keep up with the pace of how much is happening.
So out of all of the moves that the president has been making over the last week, is there anything that stands out to you from looking at it from the inside as a reporter? Anything that stood out?
So I think certainly the firings of the inspector generals that you mentioned really stands out as, just a moment where you see this president who has talked about really using this position as a form to get revenge against his political opponents, really remove one of the guardrails that exists to hold him accountable in those practices. And that was a report that our colleagues here at the Washington Post broke and really, I think, sent shockwaves throughout the political establishment to see that happen. Even Republicans on the Hill, traditionally you need to give a 30-day notice to Congress, were surprised to learn about this development.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into that. But James, when President Trump responded to the firings, Friday night firings of the Inspector General, he said that he didn't really know them and that it happens all the time, that it's standard. Let's break down. Is that true?
It really did come as a shock. I mean, it's one of our colleagues was calling up the IGs, and one of the IGs learned they had been fired because a Washington Post reporter said, "Did you get an email saying you're fired?" And this person looked and was like, "Oh, crap." Sergio Gore, the head of the White House Office of Personnel, did just email and say, "Your services are no longer required. We're going in a different direction." So the IG, I mean, it sounds kind of wonky, but it was basically something that was created post-Watergate. It was one of the key reforms. There was a law that passed in 1978 that all of the cabinet agencies had to have someone who was independent, who would be a watchdog, who would audit spending and operations and would report to Congress. This person would have to get confirmed by the Senate, but basically they were insulated from political interference. It's not supposed to be a political person. In 1981, when Ronald Reagan became president, he basically did what Trump did. He purged all of the IGs and wanted to put his own people in. And there was massive backlash, including from Republicans on Capitol Hill. And so no president had really tried to do it again since. And interestingly, during the pandemic in the spring of 2020, so much was going on. Trump, in pretty rapid succession, fired 5 inspectors general in 6 weeks. And it was, he got rid of the State Department IG because he'd been investigating Mike Pompeo for using government employees to run personal errands. He got rid of the HHS IG because she had talked about shortages of supplies at hospitals. And so this was one of those things where there actually is a big caucus on Capitol Hill. People like Chuck Grassley, the 90-year-old senator from Iowa, who've long been very supportive of inspectors general. When Biden was president in 2022, they actually passed a significant reform of this new law. And the idea was that you need the 30-day notice to Congress, and you have to have like a legitimate cause, like a case specific justification. It's not enough to just say we're going another direction. And Trump has just sort of willfully violated that. And so what Trump said on Air Force One, where Cat was, I didn't know these people, even though he had actually appointed a bunch of them when he got rid of the previous ones, but also that this happens all the time. And the truth is, Joe Biden only got rid of one IG in his 4 years, and it was the IG for the Railroad Commission. And it was because there'd been an internal investigation that had shown he'd created a toxic workplace environment, really a legitimate cause. But it's just so indicative of Trump trying to remove the guardrails, but also being focused on retribution. And between the IGs, the second thing that like every Republican I'm talking to all weekend, people are so exercised about is removing the security details. That's the other thing that just is coming up constantly when I talk to Republicans on the Hill. They're saying it's so outrageous that John Bolton, Mike Pompeo, Brian Hook, who was the Trump envoy in the first term, they all lost their security details, Dr. Fauci as well. But there's still credible intelligence that Iran wants to kill these people because they were involved in the strike on Qasem Soleimani. And you actually saw Tom Cotton, the Republican chair of the Intelligence Committee, and Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, both on the Sunday show, saying Trump needs to give these people their security details back. And a lot of people are feeling that privately. So I think those are the two big surprises of like, wow, Trump is really serious about like getting rid of checks on his power, but also getting back at people that he perceives as enemies.
Yeah, we'll talk about the freeze on federal funds in a minute. But one thing that struck me today when I was reading some reporting on the fallout from the firings of the inspectors general, there was a law professor who said it feels like the Trump administration is taking down the government from the inside. And instead of it being, sort of an insurrection or anything that you're seeing physically, there was actually moves inside to make sure that presidential power may usurp congressional power and may circumvent congressional power. Is that your sense, too, that some of these moves are really about Trump shaping the government that he wants, despite that there are guardrails set up, like you mentioned with Chuck Grassley?
I think we're seeing that consistently. They're taking a lot of executive actions where, people have raised legal constitutional concerns, for instance, about plans to revoke birthright citizenship. And you see, despite that, this administration still move forward and sign an executive order to that effect. And so just that flurry of activity. I mean, even when we were on Air Force One last night, he signed 4 more executive orders reshaping the military and the DEI policies there. And so just looking at how he spent his first several days in office really is an indication that he plans to use his powers to the full extent to reshape the government in the picture of his campaign promises. What we hear the president and press secretary Caroline Leavitt say again and again is promises made, promises kept. And that is, something that they're really emphasizing with these powers.
Yeah, I'm interested, too, to hear what it felt like as a reporter when this major news breaks. It's late on a Friday night, by the way, usually the time that things happen that you don't want a lot of people to hear about. But what was it like for you as a reporter when that news broke?
So it was really shocking because we were just coming to the conclusion of a jam-packed day with the president. We had departed from Washington, flown to North Carolina, where President Trump visited with victims of the hurricane. Then we went to California, flew over the fire damage there. He met with people. And then we had flown to Las Vegas. And the news broke just as the press corps was checking into Trump International Hotel for the night after this busy day. And we had talked to the president probably at least 5 times throughout the day. The majority of those question and answer sessions focused on really the damage from these natural disasters and his shocking comments that he was thinking about getting rid of FEMA amid these catastrophes. And so we really had no indication during that time that he was planning to take this extreme action. And we were not able to actually ask him about it again until the next day when we were at a casino and he was actually on the floor standing at a craps table. And a member of the press corps, asked him about the firings and why he did that. He ignored the question. And one of the men playing just said, "Excuse me, I'm rolling here."
Wow.
Amazing.
It's amazing. James, your reaction to that, hearing that that is how this major news makes it to the reporters who were with him all day.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a contrast to Joe Biden, as Trump calls him Sleepy Joe. I mean, this is just like the chaos, the whirlwind, the Tasmanian devil, Cat's with him is from North Carolina to California to Vegas to Florida to back. And he's trying to create this whirling dervish sense. He wants to seem like he's using the muscles of the presidency in a way that his predecessor didn't. And I do think that it is by design that they're just doing so much that you can't keep it all straight. And that, I think that a lot of the stuff people are kind of like, Andy Ogles, the Republican congressman from Tennessee, is introducing a constitutional amendment to allow Trump to serve a third term. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that, honestly, is a distraction. But a lot of people chase after that. There's this very real natural disaster in California. And there's just so many balls in the air. It's the chaos that we really did become accustomed to during the first 4 years. And I think it's like muscle memory. We're starting to kind of we're not conditioned for this sort of the craziness but it is what is in store. And it's why we're lucky to have Cat on the White House beat.
Yeah, agreed. Kat, can you tell us a little bit about what the president's mood has been for the last week? I mean, for us who are watching it and covering it, from what we're hearing and seeing, it appears he's in a very good mood. So first, actually, I want to play some tape to show you how the president has been appearing in the last 7 days.
The guy was a disaster, okay? We want to be nice, and he's probably not listening right now because it's a little late, but I don't want him to listen. I don't want to say it. I feel badly. I was, making the inauguration speech, and I'm saying all the bad things. And he's sitting right here. I'm saying they were a horrible administration. They didn't know what they were doing. They were grossly incompetent. I got a guy sitting right next to him. It's not that easy to do, even though he didn't understand what I was saying. He really did.
So it feels like he's a very confident person right now. He's also continuing to throw jabs at the former administration. What's been your view on just the mood that he's in right now?
He's in a great mood. He feels like the first week has been a major success. He's talked to the press about how this is perhaps the most successful first week of any president in history. He's using that level of extreme rhetoric. He does seem very focused still on former President Biden. I think almost every time he gave public remarks, he continued to attack the former president or joke around about him. One thing that was notable to me on Saturday when we were at an event in Vegas where he was talking about the no tax on tips policy, he really seemed to just be having fun as he was talking about some of this. As much as you'll sometimes see Trump joke or even sometimes perform these sort of one-man plays and monologues that we see on stage, you often don't see him actually laugh himself. And that was one thing that was happening that day when he was imitating the world leaders who were calling him and saying that they had, they were starving for love from the United States after Biden had ignored them in Trump's view for so long. And he was really just kind of having fun and laughing as he did that. And I also just think the frequency that he spoke to the press on this trip, too, was an indication of just how proud he is of what he's doing and how eager he is to get that message out there to the American public. The number of times that he stopped to talk to us on Friday as he was visiting these various locations that we discussed, the fact that he did 2 separate on the record gaggles on Air Force One, I think that, is maybe more than Biden did his entire presidency. And so you just see him really trying to be out there and in the public eye at all times.
Yeah, James, what do you think about that? Is he in a honeymoon period? Because many presidents are usually when they won, they're making the government into what they see. But is it going to last? And, what are you making of the president right now?
It never lasts. but it is a honeymoon. Every president gets one. Trump really didn't get this honeymoon in 2017, even before he took office, and Republicans weren't really bought into his agenda. And now, he's talking to the Congressional Republican Retreat. They're literally eating hamburgers. So a member posted a picture, and they had Donald Trump's name branded on the mini slider, and they're all he is the dominant force, not just in Republican politics but in American life. He's completely dominated our attention. He's a pop culture sensation. People are doing his dance. I think he did really enjoy the inauguration festivities, and he's getting what he didn't get 8 years ago. And also he feels like it's validation and triumph after he was in the wilderness, and he feels like everyone was coming after him, and he persevered. And so I do think eventually, of course, once you actually have to start governing and trying to pass legislation, and you're going to have divides within the Republican coalition, and eventually he's going to be seen as a lame duck because he can't run for another term. And that'll all play out. But right now, I think he's at the apex of his power and influence and potentially popularity, and he's clearly enjoying it, as is his right to do.
Well, the president may be riding high and in this honeymoon phase, but there is a lot of chaos that has ensued. And so up next, we are going to dive into what it means that federal funds, grants, loans have been frozen. So what does the pause on federal grants actually mean? We're going to dive into that now. So at 5 p.m. today, so it's Tuesday, a new action will take place where federal funds, loans, and grants will be frozen. I think it's right now what we're sensing is it's a bit murky, the details on what that will do and who it'll affect. But what we do know is there will be disruptions that will be seen, assistance to homeless shelters, financial aid for college students, health grants that are distributed by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, state and disaster reconstruction, as well as those who receive federal grants for the nation's energy supply. So this is widespread. And again, we still don't know exactly what the implications might be, but do you both have a sense of how this will affect people moving forward at the real world level?
So I think one big question right now is how long will this pause be in effect? It's very unclear if this is just, a temporary measure until Donald Trump is able to place his picks at some of these agencies, or, is this a real shift in how the government distributes funding to the American people? But certainly the categories you just laid out, financial aid, relief for people experiencing homelessness. Mm-hmm. These are situations where you can't wait a day or a week to get those funds. And so we will see some people, I think, really struggle with this decision in the coming days. And then the other question is just what knock-on effect does this have on the federal workforce and the federal civil service writ large? I mean, you have a lot of civil servants who are grappling right now with what is their role going to be in a Trump administration. And if there are limits like this on their ability to do their job, it's a big question whether they'll stay in those positions moving forward.
Yeah, and James, weigh in on that. This seems to be putting a lot of the agencies into further chaos. Like they were still cleaning up some of the decisions and actions made last week before this news dropped. So from the perch of someone who's working inside one of the federal government agencies, what does this feel like and what does this do? It's
chaos. And I think it's by design. I think Trump wants to show that he's in charge and in command, and that he's approving the spending, and that he's taking his effort to remake the government seriously. But I think it is, traumatizing for people who are trying to either depend on government benefits or trying to figure out how to administer these consistent with the law. And a lot of the conversation about this freeze really reminds me of the conversation around government shutdowns, right? It's like, who's going to be affected if government shuts down on September 30th? Like, who's going to lose out? And I think Democrats who've been grasping at straws for how do you go back on the offensive, because they really are on their back foot, see the chance to highlight individuals who are going to be really affected the same way during a shutdown, and use that to make the case. Government really matters. It affects people's lives. You don't think government matters, but you actually are getting this benefit from it. Maybe that's winter heat in northern Minnesota, and so there's that. And then the second thing is, I think that this actually may potentially complicate Russ Vought's confirmation as the director of the Office of Management and Budget. He is someone who was a central figure in the first impeachment. He believes that the executive branch should take more power away from the legislative branch. I think a lot of people think like the executive branch has gotten too powerful and Congress should reassert itself, but he believes the opposite. And the Senate committee, I believe the Budget Committee, is supposed to vote on his nomination on Thursday, and I think that this could complicate it. It's probably going to be a party line vote, and he's someone who he says that what's called the Impoundment Act, which was another one of those post-Watergate reforms, just like the Inspectors General, he says it's unconstitutional, and he thinks that you can just not spend money that Congress has appropriated if you don't want to, and this is likely going to end up bogged down in the courts. So a lot of this is really, as Cat points out, this is going to be resolved in a few weeks. It's going to cause some discomfort for some people, but it's really a bigger fight about the role of government and the role of like the executive branch vis-a-vis the legislative branch. That's what this fight is really about. And I think there's going to be discomfort, but that big picture, abstract, frankly, constitutional debate is what's really starting to unfold, and I think where this will head.
Yeah, Kat, before you were our White House reporter, you followed tech policy and the tech CEOs. And in fact, you are kind of looping that into your current beat, is seeing the impact of the tech CEOs on this administration. Do you have a sense how Doge or Elon Musk are a part of some of these decisions that Trump is making right now?
So this is very much in line with the rhetoric that we've heard from Elon Musk around how he wants Doge to really remake the federal government. He wants to assess all of the spending that is happening in the government and really rethink how those funds are distributed and address what he says are forms of government waste. I think the problem is when you talk to people who have worked on fiscal policy and budgets for a long time in Washington, D.C., is that if there were obvious places to cut the waste that wouldn't affect people's day-to-day lives, they probably would have done that by now, right? This is not a new problem for people in Washington to grapple with. And, I think one thing we'll be watching this week is really how the Democrats do what James said, how they try to elevate some of these stories, and whether this is an area where they are able to mount an organized response to Trump, because thus far, it seems like in the first week, they've really struggled to do that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And even Congress overall, because this, again, what I am hearing from both parties, more so Democrats right now, is that this is circumventing their powers. They pass a federal budget. So to freeze those funds that have been appropriated already to go to these programs shouldn't be happening. It shouldn't even be a conversation. So like you both said, perhaps Democrats will use this strategically and start talking about it. I am interested, though, if you read the acting OMB director, when he put out the memo that announced that this freeze would be happening, a lot of it felt like it was about the culture wars. He mentions that we aren't going to fund woke policies. And it doesn't seem like a lot of specifics are a part of this decision. Do you all sense that this is more about messaging or really looking at the federal budget and where it goes?
I think at this moment, it appears to be mostly about messaging. You see in the early weeks of his administration, Trump is really targeting a lot of the government programs that are at the center of the so-called culture wars. You see his focus on DEI programs, his focus on issues related to gender. And so certainly they are trying to tie, this broader fiscal debate that some, I think, members of his party look at from a very academic and ideological lens to these more popularized narratives in the media around these more polarizing political issues.
Yeah, James, what do you think about that? Is it ideology, or, eventually are they going to catch on that some people may be upset that that community block grant that now is frozen won't be happening in their city?
Well, I think that it's one of those, they're being they're being intentionally vague and ambiguous, right? So that they can sort of, if there is backlash, be like, yeah, this was temporary. Of course, we're going to have that. And remember, the majorities in Congress are so narrow that all spending in the government has some constituency, and some of it may be wasteful spending, but there's some member or some district that it's really important to. And so when you start doing what Elon Musk does in his private businesses, which is, delete, let's try to look for efficiencies by cutting stuff, that might work really well at a car company, but it's a different matter when you have people who are depending on home heating in the wintertime, or even, Pete Hegseth has come in as defense secretary. He also has put in this, we're having a moratorium on putting out federal money for construction projects and contractors, and all of a sudden, that those projects are in some member's district. And so that member is going to hear from their constituents, and this is how the government's supposed to work. And they're going to flip out and be really angry. And then Hegseth will back down, but do it in what will be a face-saving way and say, we reviewed these programs and this is vital and this isn't. And, so that's, I think the chaos is the point. I think that they all want to seem like we're coming in and we are a bull in a china shop. We have a mandate for disruption. We're going to be disruptive. And I think that the disruption will be painful because there's, some things are crying out for disruption, but other things are carefully set up the way they are for a very good reason, and they're going to find out what those things are. And you have all these people who've come in who, are neophytes and don't really understand how government works. And maybe they have fresh eyes, but maybe they also break some stuff that actually matters.
Yeah. And I guess it remains to be seen how this will play out, especially when, voters and people back home in the districts are even talking about some of the road projects or through the infrastructure bill, some of the grants that came through that are frozen. That's a good point. So we'll see. I guess it's a developing story that we'll all be covering. One last question to you, Kat. I know you've done some reporting about AI advancements and how Trump has been reacting. Can you tell us a little bit about, especially the news this week about the Chinese company, the AI company that is backed by China, and how that has gotten Trump's attention?
Yes, it's been fascinating to see how much in this very busy first week in office, Trump seems to be thinking and talking about AI. And, that might be a knock-on effect of how much time he is now spending with technology leaders. And yesterday, he talked about the developments at DeepSeek in both his speech and on Air Force One with reporters. And he actually said he views this development as a positive for the United States, because he says that anytime that technology can be developed more efficiently and cheaper, as we are seeing in China, that's good for everyone. And so he is insistent that, this is a wake-up call for the U.S. tech industry. He's used this news to advance his position on artificial intelligence, which is that we should have a rollback of the Biden era policies on this technology. But he's saying, if we can find a way to do this more efficiently, cheaply, that's good for businesses overall.
Joe Biden saw artificial intelligence as a danger that needed guardrails, that needed restrictions and limits. Donald Trump sees it as an opportunity, and he wants America to be taking the lead. A lot of comparisons to kind of a Sputnik moment where the Russians put the satellite up and we had a space program, but it spurred investment in our space program, but it also spurred more learning about science and technology in classrooms in the 1950s. And the U.S. has taken the lead on AI, but it's sort of fragile. And I think that what Trump does see, partly because he's hanging out with all these tech executives, is there is a real opportunity to maybe do AI cheaper and more efficiently than we're doing it. There's this belief that it's going to take all these chips and all these data centers that are really high end. And I take anything the Chinese say with a grain of salt because they're liars. But if they actually are doing DeepSeek as efficiently as they say, maybe that means we can do it more efficiently as well, with less of a demand on the power grid and that kind of thing. So it is, I think it's an opportunity, but there definitely is a lot of panic. But sometimes, you could never put, don't let the panic go to waste.
Cat Zakrzewski, thank you so much. Our White House reporter. It's been a busy 7 days, only 7 days in. But we look forward to some of your great reporting coming up. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Yes. And up next, we are going to turn our attention to Capitol Hill, one of my favorite places to talk about, and give a preview of the confirmation hearings that everyone will be watching this week. So this week, James, on Capitol Hill, of course, Republicans are in Florida with Trump trying to figure out the budget reconciliation package that they want to put forward, which will probably be what we're talking about next week. Yeah. But this week on Capitol Hill, it's mainly the Senate right now going through a lot of confirmations. And we will be covering all of them that will be happening all at the same time. We have Tulsi Gabbard on Thursday for DNI. We have Kash Patel also at the same time for FBI director. And we also have RFK Jr., who will first be headed to Senate Finance, that committee. And then on Thursday, he has another one in front of the Senate Help Committee. When it comes to RFK, we've had some breaking news today where Caroline Kennedy, his cousin, apparently has written a letter that she has given to senators who will be hearing. You've got the letter right there.
It is a doozy.
It came out right before we came to air, so I need to read through it. But one thing that I have read in our reporting is that she refers to him as a predator. Talk a little bit about what the weight of this type of letter might have.
It's honestly, it's stunning. Caroline Kennedy, the daughter of John F. Kennedy, her cousin RFK Jr., obviously Robert F. Kennedy, both of their parents assassinated in the 1960s. Mm-hmm. Very tight-knit, storied family. The Kennedys watching with alarm as RFK Jr. sort of seemed to them to go off the deep end over the last few years. But this just, I mean, the writing is something. I mean, it says, it's no surprise that he keeps birds of prey as pets because he himself is a predator. She says that siblings and cousins who Bobby encouraged down the path of substance abuse suffered addiction, illness, and death, while Bobby has gone on to misrepresent, lie, and cheat his way through life. I mean, it really is, it's pretty stunning. And what I think it will do is shore up Democratic opposition. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of discussion that maybe someone like Sheldon Whitehouse, the Democrat from Rhode Island, mm-hmm. who went to University of Virginia Law School with RFK Jr., they're longtime friends, that maybe he would vote for Kennedy. John Fetterman from Pennsylvania, maybe he would vote for Kennedy. And I think having the Kennedy family come and say, like, this guy is awful, mm-hmm. Will maybe keep the Democrats in line. And then, I think I'm not sure Caroline Kennedy's going to convince any Republicans to vote against her cousin, but big news and really a remarkable letter.
Yeah, outside of Pete Hegseth, the three who are going to be in front of these Senate committees this week are the most controversial. Mm-hmm. I guess they're saving them for last or near last. There are still some more that will be coming. But is this the week where we could see one or more of Trump's picks fail?
I was talking to a senior Senate Republican leadership aide over the weekend who said, once these people get before the committee, they're going to get confirmed. That was his view, was like, if we can get them to the committee process, then we can make it. I think Tulsi Gabbard is the one that Donald Trump himself is most concerned about being vulnerable, followed by RFK, followed by Kash Patel. It's really interesting because I think, honestly, if you talk to Democrats in Washington, Kash Patel is the person who they see as most problematic, most dangerous, because he's such a Trump loyalist and he'll do his bidding as FBI director, and he really could go after Democrats and really abuse the power of the FBI. But it seems like Republicans are more or less on board. I mean, one of the reasons it's so interesting, and you were saying before we started taping, is you're reporting that they sort of put all these hearings together so that the Democrats wouldn't be able to organize. There's just such a flurry that three of the most controversial nominees are happening at the same time. It will be interesting to see what breaks through. What I've noticed in the last 24 hours is there's a real big mobilization on the right among conservatives to stop RFK Jr. And it appears to be emanating to some degree from the media empire controlled by Rupert Murdoch. The Wall Street Journal editorial page had a just scathing long editorial explaining why RFK is really like a boon for trial lawyers, that business should be opposed to him. And then the New York Post, which is also owned by Murdoch, has this unusual, like big, for those who are watching, spread, senators. And it's very interesting because it basically uses Trump's words against RFK from when RFK was running against him last year, where Trump said, no Republican can possibly vote for this guy. And it says, Mr. President, you were right. Like, no Republican senator can possibly vote. And essentially what the Murdoch media empire is saying is this was a political deal that Trump made to get RFK to support him. He promised him a job, a good job in the administration, and Republican senators don't have to go along. So it's fascinating to watch this play out. Mike Pence, the Republican former vice president, has been trying to get conservatives to oppose Kennedy because he's traditionally been very supportive of abortion rights. And so it'll be interesting during these hearings to see, does Kennedy commit not to do anything about abortion? Does Kennedy try to say, I'm not going to do anything on vaccines? What does he make concessions that win over some Republicans, or does he try to play for some Democrats and let some Republicans go? I mean, it is going to be quite a wild 2 days on Wednesday and Thursday.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Very interested to see where all of this goes, because I have heard Democrats and Republicans both incredibly skeptical about the RFK nomination specifically. And a lot of people, in the public arena, citizens are really concerned, especially when it comes to his views on vaccines. We will be covering the RFK Jr. confirmation hearing tomorrow, so that is Wednesday, and also the Tulsi Gabbard confirmation hearing on Thursday. So you can join our live coverage for that. James, thank you so much.
Thanks, Rhonda.
For another good conversation, and thank you all for listening. And you can join us again on Thursday with our next episode of Sidebar. I'm Rhonda Colvin from the Washington Post. Have a good day.